Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge recruiting analyst Dylan Callaghan-Croley. We're coming to you guys just a week after Oregon State's late signing period. We got a whole bunch of stuff recruiting-wise to get into. Later in the podcast, TJ Mathewson and Ryan Harlan will join us. We're going to talk some women's basketball with the Beavers surging on the hardwood, and then we're also going to talk a little baseball with the baseball season kicking off this week. But again, we're going to go ahead and start with some recruiting coverage right here at BeaversEdge.com. Thanks for everyone for listening to the podcast. Dylan, how are things with you, my man? Getting a little much-needed R&R after the crazy busy month plus, really, basically since the end of the season. It's been nonstop for Oregon State. So a moment to collectively catch our breath, man. How you been?
I've been good. I can't complain. It's I can't believe we're halfway through February already, but football season's finally wrapped up with Super Bowl this past Sunday. I'm ready. I'm kind of ready for baseball season to start here now. So
yeah,
excited for this weekend. And of course, Major League Baseball teams are reporting this week now. So I'm ready for the spring.
Yeah,
and I'm sure in a couple of months I'll be ready for football season again. But gonna enjoy the R&R for a little bit.
no doubt. And spring football obviously going to start first week of March. So we're going to get a chance to look at Trent Bray's new squad here, basically right around the corner too. It feels like he just got hired and we were going through all that. And here we are in spring. So that old saying, life moves fast, would definitely. And Dylan have to go out and throw out and say congrats to the Chiefs, as you mentioned it. I was pulling for him, so I was happy to see Mahomes win. Sorry if anybody else in the pod was pulling for the Niners. But yeah, it turned out to be quite the game on Sunday. Great way to close out football season.
I mean, is there any other way you'd rather a season end than the best quarterback in the world? At least attempting to make a final drive or two drives. I mean, that's how you want it to end. You want to see the quarterbacks go for the win. And
definitely.
Patrick Mahomes once again, steps up when it matters.
Absolutely.
The GOAT argument is going to be very interesting in a couple years about a decade or so from now when he retires. But let's get him recruited.
Absolutely, man. I mean, as you mentioned, Oregon State obviously finished their signing class last week. We talked about it at BeaversEdge.com, and we obviously have a full signing day Q&A with Trent Bray up on the website too from last week. So definitely go check that out, as we had an exclusive phone call with Trent Bray. It was awesome to get to talk to that guy for a few minutes. I'll just say this. Yeah, just say this right off the bat. Like, Dylan, he's just a great guy to talk with, and that's the one thing I wanted to throw out there first, just from my experiences. Obviously, we talked to him this was my first time talking to Trent one-on-one, right? We were always in defensive coordinator huddles or whatnot, or even at his opening press conference with so many people there. From that perspective, I can see why he would be someone a recruit would want to talk to, because this was something where for 30 minutes, it was a very super engaging conversation back and forth. And not to say that the previous guy wouldn't have been the same, but Trent Bray's got a little more personality than Jonathan Smith does. And I think that's kind of showing so far, and we're kind of seeing how he puts his imprint on the program and on the staff itself. And let's go ahead and use the staff segment, Dylan, to go ahead and talk into the recruiting now. It really seems to me like Trent Bray surrounded himself with extremely good staffers, both schematically, football-wise, and also really good recruiters. Let's talk about Kyle Devan and the offensive line. It feels like the Beavers have been able to kind of maintain that recruiting level we saw under Jim Mahalchek so far early. They're extending into 2025 pretty well. What's been impressive to you so far as we obviously wrapped up 2024 and start looking at 2025, where they got some kids, visiting, looking at it, and all that?
Yeah, so I would start out by saying that I think with Kyle Devan, it's not going to be the recruiting that makes that determines how good of a successor he is.
Sure,
but can the development be too near the same level? It's going to be hard to match that level because of how we all know how great the Beavers offensive line has been.
Yes, very much so.
But I think that'll be the bigger challenge going forward. That being said, Kyle Devan, the rest of the staff that Trent Bray has built, it is clear that Bray built a staff that was strong in relationship building, which of course is one of the key things when it comes to recruiting. Apologies, wife texted me. But
all good. It is Valentine's Day after all, so yeah, we're recording this podcast on a Wednesday, so gotta keep happy wife, happy life. But yes, back to your point, Dylan.
Yes, gotta stay out of the doghouse. But Kyle Devane, yeah, and the entire staff so far, I'm hearing great things. Thomas Ford, we've heard great things as well.
Yes, very much
These
so.
are very, very strong relationship guys who are going to be able to connect with these players a lot. And we're seeing, like most staffs do, but we're seeing Trent Bray and the staff really work in key areas.
Sure.
Ford has been really working hard in Washington and the Seattle areas where he has a lot of connections and has built a lot of those relationships.
Right.
We've seen a lot of this. We've seen the staffers with LA connections, like Gunderson, go down to LA and work there. Hayward's been working down there. Went on the trail. Obviously, it's a dead period right now, so everybody's back in Corvallis.
Right.
But went on the trail. Kyle Devane's been spending time a little bit everywhere, but a lot of Arizona right now. I'm gonna butcher it because I'm terrible with Polynesian names.
Eliza Tuiaki.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Yes.
I was waiting for you to save me.
Yeah. Tuiaki. Sorry, I didn't. I was like, okay, I think he's talking about Coach Tuiaki. Yes. It is. It took me a minute to get it too. Only reason I've got it pronounced is because when he was here back in 2016. But yes, Coach Tuiaki.
Yeah. What? Once I hear it a few times, I'll get it. But yes, Coach Tuiaki.
Yeah.
He's spent most of his coaching career in Utah. He's been spending a ton of time on the recruiting trail in Utah. So they're really, finding their strengths, and they are trying to execute on those strengths when it comes to recruiting trail. And Kyle Devane, who we'll talk about in a few minutes, has, I think, done an excellent job so far. And we've been seeing him build his board on the offensive line here, more so than any other position. Because the staff, yes, there are guys from the staff that are holdovers from the last staff. So some of the board still remains the same, but a lot of it's going to be a new board. So we're still in the early stages of that big board per se for the Beavers coming to fruition. But Kyle Devane has definitely probably been at the forefront of that development here over the last couple of weeks.
Right. And a couple things I wanted to follow up with you on, Dylan, just to kind of get your thoughts on. One, you mentioned Ryan Gunderson. Do you think, and obviously when we talked to Trent Bray, he said they don't have a lot of room left, but a unique thing is that because of Chip Kelly's departure, there could be guys from UCLA who enter the portal and have that open portal. Do you think there's a chance the Beavers could kick the tire? And I don't know off the top of my head, could kick the tires on anybody who could, have a relationship with Gunderson and maybe move? That was one of the first things I wanted to mention to you, because Chip Kelly obviously threw a big tidal wave across college football by leaving in February. Like that's quite surprising. I think I guess when you learn more, it's not all that surprising that Chip Kelly was basically trying to get out in any way, shape, or form the last couple of weeks. But I'm curious if you think they could kick the tires on anybody potentially leaving UCLA.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because most of the time I would say yes, and I still think there is a possibility that we see some departures from UCLA. But I do think going with Deshaun Foster, I know he was technically with the Raiders at the time of hiring, but essentially an in-house hire because he was there this past season. And he seems to be very well beloved by that locker room. I think that's going to help save UCLA in terms of seeing the roster rated here in the transfer portal. Kind of what we saw with the Beavers. Obviously, the Beavers did lose some key guys in the transfer portal, but by hiring Trent Bray, they were still able to keep around quite a few big time contributors as well, which I think was important. I think it's going to be important for UCLA as they make their jump to the Big Ten, because that was going to be hard with Chip Kelly or not, and if they lost, a ton of their roster, would have made it even tougher. But yeah, I think it's definitely something to watch to see if anybody does enter transfer portal from UCLA in the upcoming weeks or post spring, and especially if they're on the offensive side of the ball, it could make sense for the Beavers to kick the tires there.
Yeah, and I again don't know off the top of my head, but if UCLA happen to have a tight end I know that would be something for Oregon State, as they kind of are still a little thin there. Outside of that, maybe a receiver. I wouldn't expect them to take anybody offensive line, running back,
Yeah.
or quarterback, obviously.
Yeah.
Another question I wanted to ask you too, Dylan, as well,
Sure.
is, do you think from what you've seen so far, one of the bigger criticisms of Oregon State's defensive line was maybe the fact that Coach Leahy Sorianoa did not necessarily bring in a whole bunch of, like, the size was always something that was a bit concerning. The fact that Coach Tuiaki was able to get some big size transfers in the offseason, do you think it's a stretch to say Coach Tuiaki could be a better recruiter than Coach Leahy was?
No, I don't think that it is a stretch. I I thought they did a solid job in the past of recruiting the defensive line, but it was never one that I was like, oh wow, this is like a really
Sure.
impressive guys. No, Kelsey Howard, that was a big pickup for them, of
Yes,
course,
last year,
and
yes.
there was big hits over time, but in general, it was it was solid, but never great or elite. And yeah, at Oregon State, it's gonna be hard to do
Sure.
great or elite on a consistent basis. But I think they under Coach Tuiaki, they do have a chance to really improve in that area recruiting the defensive line, especially if
Right.
he can create some sort of foothold in Utah. There's a ton of
Mm-hmm.
defensive line and offensive line talent in the state of Utah. And if they could get a bigger presence there, especially, the Salt Lake City area, which, gonna be honest, I'm not sure there's any other place kids really come out of in
Yeah,
Utah than Salt Lake City.
sure.
But if he can really solidify his spot, solidify a foothold in Utah on the defensive line for Oregon State, that would be huge. And Oregon State has a huge Polynesian culture
Right.
historically on the football side of things, especially. And I think if he can continue that culture building, it's
Yeah.
only going to be beneficial because they'll be able to have that culture transcends state borders. That culture will take
Right.
them to California, Nevada, Oregon,
Right.
Washington, anywhere up and down the Pacific coast, right?
Sure.
And not to Hawaii. So I think there's absolutely a chance that the defensive line recruiting can improve here
For sure.
Under the new staff in general.
For sure. A couple more things here between Dylan and I before we take a break and we bring on TJ Mathewson and Ryan Harlan to talk a little Beaver baseball, with the Beavers starting their season this week, and obviously talk about the women's basketball team, which is arguably surging and playing some of their best basketball in probably 4 or 5 years, probably pre-COVID. So Scott Ruick's got his squad going. Dylan, last couple things for you. One thing that from Trent Bray that really stood out to me is he mentioned that the defense, and I obviously knew this, but I didn't put it all together at once when he said, on the staff, we have 3 guys who were former defensive coordinators and really good at it. In Trent Bray, Coach Tuiaki was the defensive coordinator for BYU for many years. And then obviously Keith Hayward, defensive coordinator for multiple stops. How much does that help the defense, Dylan, having that much elite defensive coaching ability on the side? Like, is it as significant as he says it is?
Yeah, I think so. You can be tremendous recruiters, but if you can't develop or coach that talent,
Right.
it's wasted talent. And I think we've seen that Trent Bray, especially
Sure.
since he came back to Oregon and took Corvallis, has shown to be a terrific talent developer and coach. He puts his guys in positions to win, in positions to make plays.
Sure.
And I think that's going to be a trend that we see going forward with defensive coordinator Keith Hayward and the rest of the defensive staff. Is there going to be hiccups along the way? I'm sure there will be. But I think, yes, absolutely, it is as big of a factor as Trent Bray is saying, because we've seen plenty of teams out there who can recruit great
Sure.
on the defense side of the ball, but aren't able to put it together. Oklahoma, for example, historically always has great players on both sides of the ball, never can put it together. USC, we've seen plenty. Sure. Great players, can't put it together. So if you can't develop that talent, if you can't coach that talent or put that talent in positions to make plays on a consistent basis, it's wasted talent. And it's gonna unfortunately waste it could be it can end up wasting your season away as well if you're not able to do that. So I absolutely agree with Coach Bray in that aspect.
For sure. And last thing for Dylan here is we're going to go ahead and take a break and move over to the second half of our podcast. Let's talk a little bit about Eddie Freoff and Malachi Durant, Dylan.
Yeah,
Obviously, those two
sure.
receivers were the holdovers that did not sign from the early signing period. I want to throw in offensive lineman Jaden Tuia, who also signed, but specifically those two, Dylan. Those guys didn't sign the first class. Malachi Durant was the bigger name, but Eddie Freoff obviously has great size and put up good numbers at a relatively small school in Prineville. I'm curious for you how big you thought that was. They were able to hang on to those guys. And do you think, like, for instance, do you think Jonathan Smith and Michigan State tried to go after either one of those guys? And do you think that regardless, it was significant for Bray and company to hold on to both of them?
Sure. With Malachi Durant, I believe there was definitely some interest from Oregon State from Michigan State and trying to steal Durant. Freoff, unfortunately, me and him have never been able to talk a ton in his recruitment, so I don't have a ton of insight on Freoff, and unfortunately, that does happen. There are a lot of kids out there that are very open to talking about everything, and some kids just like to keep things more personal, close to the chest, which is obviously not that I take issue with. I totally get it, but. Yeah, to keep those two guys as part of their class is absolutely huge. Because you combine those two with Jordan Anderson, and that is a really terrific trio of wide receivers to bring in. Anderson, obviously high 4-star. I'm not sure where he ended up in our final rivals rankings. Let me pull it up. Ended at number 101.
He was huge. And you talk about a guy who was committed to Oregon at one point and a guy who, they were able to flip. We talked to Trent Bray about Jordan Anderson, and he called that huge. Again, you can see his full comments at Beaver's Edge at the signing day Q&A with Trent. But yeah, I mean, Jordan Anderson was huge. I mean, and then you throw in those other two guys. It's a solid. And then why not, Dylan, for the sake of argument, put in Darius Clemens, too, who we've mentioned on previous podcasts. Yeah. That's a massive influx of wide receiver talent, and you needed it with Silas Bolden and Anthony Gould leaving.
And this is why, going back to relationship building, a relationship building skill for a coach is so important. It seems like every coach would have it, but the truth is not every coach has that. Oregon State's coaching staff right now does have that, and that's a big reason they landed guys like Anderson and Clemens out of the transfer portal, because they had that relationship built from previously in the recruitment. Now Anderson is a little bit more recent, but they had previously built relationships. So when those players came back onto the market in their respective fashions, Oregon State was in a position to make a play on both of them and ended up, getting two terrific high-end wide receivers that could really change the dynamics of that offense next season, because both should have an opportunity to make an impact in 2024. You had, Damian Martinez at running back, and you can start seeing it all come together for Oregon State on the offense side of football. The biggest question is just how the quarterback play will be. And unfortunately, that is also the question mark that will make or break the season. They brought in two guys we think are, very high quality quarterbacks, but it's just one of those things that you really don't know what you're getting until, week one of the 2024 season. And even then, it's still going to be a question mark until they prove it over a handful of weeks.
Sure, and absolutely. I mean, the spring football is going to be absolutely intense to see how that quarterback battle starts, obviously, between, Giovanni McCoy, Jabari Johnson, and then Ben Gulbranson, obviously, and then Trent Bray and Travis Throckmorton will also get a chance. So that'll be something to keep an eye on for sure as we enter spring football. And Dylan and I and the rest of the staff will obviously be doing spring football preview podcasts as we get closer. I want to go ahead and thank Dylan for joining me on this edition of the podcast. We'll go ahead and take a quick break. We'll be back with TJ Mathewson and Ryan Harlan. We're going to talk a little Oregon State women's basketball and baseball to wrap up this edition of the podcast. Dylan, good to talk with you as always, my friend, and make sure everyone check out BeaversEdge.com to read the latest from Dylan Callaghan-Croley. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Welcoming you back to the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com. Big thanks to Dylan Callaghan-Croley as we just did our Beavers Edge recruiting segment, but now bringing on the rest of the Beavers Edge crew, TJ Mathewson and Ryan Harlan, talk a little Oregon State women's basketball. basketball, some baseball, and maybe even a little spring football as we are getting closer to the start of spring. But welcome, guys. Good to talk with you, TJ. Let's go ahead and start with you, man. How are things, and how's life down in Corbo, my friend?
It's good. Just we're keeping busy. I'm ready. I'm ready for baseball to start.
Yeah,
It's gonna be good to get baseball to back, and the basketball, especially the women's team, which we'll touch on here in a second, has done a good job of bridging the gap between football and baseball. But while the weather might not necessarily be warming up yet, the baseball is it's certainly getting here. But it's good, buddy. We're just keeping busy.
yeah, that's always good to hear. And Ryan, obviously great to have you on. Haven't had you on the podcast since we had Trent Bray hired. Feels like
Yeah.
forever ago now. But good to have you on, man. I know our Beavers Edge subscribers have been seeing you on the damn board and stuff you've been helping us out with as well. How's life down in Corvallis for you, my friend? And you getting ready for the start of spring as well?
Yeah, it's busy. It's also softball season has started up and paying
For
attention to
sure.
that as well. Very excited to see what Coach Berg does this year. And yeah, just women's basketball, keeping track of that, and baseball just around the corner. I'm
Absolutely.
very, very excited. I just wrote a preview actually for baseball season. So very, very much excited for
Yeah.
this weekend. Yeah.
Oh, and Oregon State's supposed to be very good this year. Obviously, we'll talk a little
Mhm.
more baseball here in a minute. But guys, we obviously have to start with like the biggest thing. We just want to make this whole podcast about Oregon State men's basketball, right? You guys down? We can talk about the all the greatness that's happening there. Sorry, I feel like
That
I
that
feel like a
Washington
I feel like a shot was needed. Not gonna lie.
that Washington game was rough. Yeah, I was there for that one.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you dig yourself into a 20-point hole at halftime. There,
Yeah.
like it was just not winning basketball that game.
I mean, just to like, this is all I'm going to say on this before we get into women's basketball. Does anything sum up how frustrating Oregon State men's basketball is than beating a top 10 team and then being absolutely dismal since?
Well, beating a top 10 team, I think the bigger thing there, Brendan, was, I mean, I think it was even just the reception of the fans. They had less fans on Saturday after the top 10 win versus Arizona and the peak excitement. And you look at the crowd on Saturday, it
Mm-hmm.
was 3,500 people. It was less than what showed up on Thursday. And it's disappointing. You would think something like that sort of captures some excitement. But even though the Beavers ended up winning that game, it really it just it didn't matter all that much. And ultimately, I think it boils down to the inability to win on the road. Still have not won on the road this season.
Right.
And that leaves you zero margin for error at home when you have an off weekend like they just had at home against the Washington schools.
Right.
You don't have the ability to go on the road, haven't shown the ability to go on the road and get any of those points back, or even try and get a quad one, quad two win back, because you have a better opportunity of that on the road because there's a bigger window of that, and they haven't been able to, and it's been disappointing. And you kind of feel the interest level waning a little bit, and it's frustrating, and it stinks. And for everyone who's hoping more, I mean, this is still not what you want to see as the team's going down the stretch.
No,
Oh
and
yeah.
I'm curious your thoughts on that too, Ryan. What's kind of the student thoughts with Oregon State men's basketball right now? Is it still something where it's going to be student supported, or are students kind of like, eh?
I think students are more in the kind of aspect. I mean, that Washington game, I was kind of just paying attention to what was going on in the court,
Sure.
and I had somebody right next to me point out how quickly fans were leaving Gill
Mm.
with it was around the 2-minute mark. I don't know
Yeah,
exactly how much time was left on the clock, and TJ, you might know maybe better than I do on that, but I've never seen that many fans file out of Guild that fast. And I think it's just more of the frustration of like,
sure.
it seems to be that this is where the poor performance comes from the men's basketball program. It's just been disappointing season all around. And from what I know from people close to the team is either it's give some of the locker room dynamics are similar to that 3-28 season a little
Sure.
bit. Guys are getting frustrated in there, and it's kind of showing a little bit out on the court. But I just kind of, part of me hopes that they can turn it around before it's too late. But also at the same time, from what they've shown on the road, not being able to win, and this kind of off week that they've had, I don't know when that opportunity will arise with the back half of their schedule.
Sure. And again, it's one of those things where I'm sure because, barring something miraculous, I think we all know where this season is ending up. And I think it'd be fair to take a deep look at the Oregon State men's basketball program this offseason. Will changes be made? I'm not optimistic, but you never know. So let's go ahead and get rid of the negatives, guys, and switch to the other locker room in Gill Coliseum, because those vibes that you talked about, Ryan, could not be more far from the truth for the Oregon State women's team. They are surging 20-3. They've won 5 in a row and have played themselves, guys, into the hosting conversation. That is important because for those who don't know, obviously, in women's basketball, if you were one of the top 4 seeds, you get to host the first 2 rounds at your home venue. So Oregon State has done this in the past, where you would host the round of 64 and then the round of 32 at Gill Coliseum. The key beyond that is this year, Portland serves as the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 host for half of the NCAA tournament. Unlike men's, where they break it into 4 different quads, women's basketball, they do half the Sweet 16 Elite 8 games at Albany, New York this year and half at Portland, Oregon. So, fellas, there is a path for Oregon State to have 2 games at Gill Coliseum and then have at least 1, if not 2 games at Moda Center. Just talk about how big of a home court advantage that would be for Oregon State. Obviously, they do great Pack and Gill, but then to know that Moda's just right up the road, and I'd be willing to bet that, unlike some of those attendance numbers at Oregon State men's basketball, Oregon State women's basketball would travel well and would, show out pretty much at Portland. So obviously there's a lot of basketball left to be played, but you can kind of see a path where Oregon State could make a decent run in this tournament.
You could see it, and it's not even set really which seed they're going to be so far. There's still plenty of needle-moving opportunities. Sure. You remember that first conference weekend of the season going down to LA and losing a couple of very close games to USC and UCLA, and now back at home at Gill, where they've played well on both the road and at home, but playing at home has been to their advantage this season. If they're able to get a couple of these wins at home, it kind of boosts their resume a little more. And then there's one more opportunity again at home against Stanford later on this season, and then Cal, who they've already beat. And so there's still more opportunity on top of the eventual Pac-12 tournament on top of that. So you can certainly see it, and it helps in their final year with a schedule that's this loaded, that they have the resume boosting opportunities at home to really take it home. And then, like you said, play the first 4 rounds of the tournament essentially at home if they want to. If they're gonna win those games, they can play the first 4 rounds of the tournament at home. And it's almost like cheating, but it works out, and it'll work out in the favor of the Beaver program, which is, the defense lately has just been unbelievable. It has been unbelievable to see what they have done on the defensive end of the ball, and playing at home certainly will play into that as the season goes along, as they get into postseason.
Sure. And again, obviously you guys weren't here in Corvallis, but seeing what they've done, especially what they did to Utah and Colorado this last week, it reminded me so much of the Oregon State women's basketball teams that were elite when I was at school. They made their Final Four run, made several Sweet 16 runs, and that's what they won it with was hard-nosed defense, and then they would get enough on offense to get obviously get the victory. And it really seems like after COVID was really tough on this program. They had some departures. They had some additions that didn't work out, ladies that transferred, a lot of movement, and for a while it wasn't necessarily great. And then Scott Rueck had to kind of rebuild and retool. And I think now, just knowing, guys, that this team is as good as it is right now, like, what do you think when you realize they don't have a senior on this team? Like, this team will be carbon copied, barring anything crazy out of a, transfer or whatever next year. Like, that's really good to see that you're doing all this. You don't have a senior. Again, got to shout out, just Reagan Beers. She's been dominant in the middle. Tamea Gardner as well. I mean, they just seem like they're playing great basketball right now. And obviously that final score against Colorado looked a lot closer than it was. Ryan, that game was over at like halftime. Like, they were up by 20 at the half on the number 4 team in Boulder. Altitude, what?
Yeah, no, I didn't expect much from that game. I'm going to be quite honest. And it wasn't not like doubting this team at all. It's hard to win against top 5 teams twice. And
Yeah.
so when I saw that they were up by 20, I was kind of, I had to do a double take of, is this box score accurate?
Right.
Like, I'm like, hold on a minute. But yeah, that game, that the box score itself, the final, doesn't do it justice. That game was pretty much over at halftime, and Ruick just, needed to basically put it in coast and
Yeah.
secure a win right then and there. And I also want to shout out one of my classmates who is on the team. Sela Heidi has been also playing really well too, in relief of Beers in the post. I think Scott has a lot of quality depth there with both Heidi, Beers, and Kelsey Reese, and it's worked out perfectly. It's worked out perfectly.
On that same point, Ryan, and obviously great inside info there. Obviously, Ryan's still a student at Oregon State and gets to obviously mingle with all these players and classes. Let's talk about the other side of that coin. We said, the vibe isn't great student-wise around the men's basketball team. Is there kind of a buzz around campus with the women's basketball team right now, just with how well they've been playing recently and how, we're obviously nearing the end of the season, just, 6 regular season matchups left. But as TJ mentioned, big games this week, huge games at home. Do you expect the students to get out there and support the women's team?
I definitely do. I know at least from my time here as a student, those games tend to have women's games tend to have a lot higher attendance than the men's do. And I think for how they've been playing over the stretch, I definitely can see them packing Gill all the way to the rafters there. Just it's I think with how the season has gone, it's definitely one where students are a lot more excited about. I know they have baseball kind of on the mind as we get closer, but we got a couple weeks before they play at Goss. But I think that excitement from this team and how they're playing and how well of a roster Ruick is constructed and developed so far over the course of this season, and that's I think excitement would be is kind of maybe the wrong word to use. Just they're ecstatic. They'll be ecstatic. If this team can host.
Absolutely. And again, like TJ mentioned, there's obviously some big games left. They'll have an opportunity this week. 2 top 10 matchups, UCLA, USC. Oregon State's been on a roll. So it's one of those things where I don't think anybody wants to play the Beavers right now. And, with how well they're playing, I really do think the sky is the limit heading into the postseason. Obviously, the matchups this week, TJ mentioned Stanford. That's going to be another huge game, but they've got them in Corvallis. So lots of exciting moments for the women's basketball team. Then they have obviously the Pac-12 tournament. But as it stands now, Oregon State is currently in that top 4 mix to host. They have, the wins this last weekend really impressed the bracketologists, so to speak. And we've obviously got that up at BeaversEdge.com. Go check out and see where they're currently projected. But vibes are high for the Oregon State women's basketball team. So definitely stay locked to them and BeaversEdge.com as we'll continue to bring you guys coverage. Let's go ahead and transition over to baseball, fellas. And we got the season opener starting this week. The Beavers going down to Surprise, Arizona. They will be on the road for actually the first couple weeks per the norm before returning to Goss Stadium the first weekend in March. TJ, let's go ahead and start with you. Obviously, Oregon State baseball last year, obviously, came up just a little bit short of their ultimate goal of trying to, get to Omaha. What do you think this year? Do you think, obviously their preseason consensus top 10 team across the board, even with a loss of a pitcher, and we'll get into that in just a moment, it still seems like this is Mitch Canham's best team, I think. And it really seems like if I was picking 8 right now, Oregon State would be in my preseason 8 for Omaha. What do you like about this team to start, TJ? And then we'll jump over to Ryan, who talked to Mitch Canham and the guys yesterday.
Yeah. So if I were to pick an 8, or Oregon State would certainly be in that mix. I still do have the question if they're going to be able to pitch enough, because in the end of the day, you not only need the top of the line starters, which the Beavers did not have last year. You need the depth behind them with a bunch of injuries that the Beavers had in the weekend rotation last year down the stretch, and what they had to throw in the tournament.
It was tough against LSU. It was so tough.
It wasn't quite enough. They ran out of gas. They ran out of arms. They didn't have enough guys to pitch last year, and that's and that's the question. And that's why losing Aiden Jimenez, it sounds like it happened in the fall already and was announced this week, stinks. Like truly stinks that is it, because he was supposed to be one of those guys. I mean, whether it was going to be starting or in the bullpen, Aiden Jimenez was going to have a role, and he was going to have a valuable role. So losing him stinks. This lineup, Omaha quality, Omaha caliber lineup. This lineup, when you look at it 1 through 9, might be closer to the 2018 lineup than you think.
Yeah,
for the most
and
part.
that
If you just look at 1 through 9.
Yeah,
I mean, we had Travis Bazzana 2 weeks ago call Brady Casper, who's going to hit in the bottom 3 of the lineup. The words out of Travis Bazzana's mouth was Brady Casper is going to be one of the best baseball players in America this season. And I'm looking at the Beavers lineup. I'm looking at the Beavers lineup. I'm like, okay, so Brady Casper is going to hit like 7th through 9th in this lineup.
Right, yeah.
They like to keep bringing up, hey, we have 12, 13, 14 guys who we could all think could easily start in this lineup. And that's just the quality of guy that is in this lineup right now. They're certainly going to score enough runs to make it. Can they pitch is the big question. We're going to get a nice, good look at Aiden May, the transfer from Arizona, high school teammate with Jacob Komatz. Those two will share a rotation coming up with the first couple of weeks. What kind of adjustments is he going to make? I mean, what is the difference between how he was developed at Arizona and how he was developed here in Corvallis? Like, is he going to take that step? This dude has explosive stuff, but where does it go from here? And how critical is that going to be for the Beavers this season? Are they going to be able to rely on him like they did with Cooper Jerpy a couple seasons ago? Are they going to have that guy on a Friday night they always know
the ace
he's going to go out there and deal? That we don't know that yet, but he certainly has the stuff to do it. So I mean, it really all boils back to the pitching staff for me, because the lineup seems about as given as it could possibly be.
And before we'll get over to you, Ryan, because you obviously caught up with Mitch Canham and Elijah Hainline and Trent Carraway yesterday. I'm curious, like, again, TJ, that's a big statement, because 2017, 2018 Oregon State baseball was perhaps the most elite 2-year run of any college baseball team in recent memory. Like, what they did those 2 years was absolutely insane. Obviously didn't get the title in 17, but I think if I'm remembering correctly, they were 53-5 or 53-6.
56-6 at the end of the season.
Thank you. See, so again, just mind-boggling numbers. And then 18 wasn't quite as elite as far as just the wins, losses, but obviously got the natty. So, Oregon State fans have been clamoring for a return trip to Omaha since that 2018. And of the teams who have kind of, the college baseball blue bloods, and I would say, at least in the 20th century, Oregon State firmly in that mix, they've been the team that's kind of had a drought for a little, we're getting on, believe this would be 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, be 5 years, officially this would be the 6th year. And, with that, TJ, and it seems silly to put a stamp on it, like they have to go to Omaha, but for a program like Oregon State, you have to consistently get there. Maybe not win it, but you have to get there every couple of years to maintain that standard. Do you think there's a ton of pressure on them to get to Omaha this year?
I think there's pressure every single season. I don't know if that would be unique to this scenario. And I think everyone understands, the players understand this, the coaches understand that, people who just do college baseball understand it this way. I mean, winning in the postseason is hard. Winning in baseball is very hard. It is accumulation of semi-random events that have to go your way to make it to the College World Series, right? A little bit easier when you're an overpowering great team. But I mean, we could just look at it for the fact that it took how many years in a row did the number one team in college baseball not make the College World Series?
Many years, yeah.
Like Wake Forest when they went last year, that was the first one. The year before, Tennessee didn't make it. The year before that, Arkansas didn't make it. The year before that, UCLA didn't make it. 2018, the number one, I can't remember who the number one seed was that year, but
Stanford.
You get the point.
Yeah.
Well, Stanford was 2. They didn't make it. The number one, I don't remember. Regardless, regardless, I don't think that team made it. Right.
Yeah.
I think I'm pretty sure the Beavers that year were the highest seed in that tournament. And if I'm wrong, they were. Yeah. But the point stands. It's hard to make it. You can be the best team in the country in the regular season, and you're not going to make it because once you get into the postseason, all these teams are just so good. And once you come to peace with that, and once you understand that, it makes it a whole lot easier to deal with the pressure of the postseason and winning in the regular season. I think the regular season will take care of itself. If the roster proves to be as deep as it is and the lineup proves to be as deep as it is, they will not have an issue winning in the regular season and putting them in the right position to make a run to Omaha. And then from that point, you'd like to get a nice draw in regionals, nice locations at preferably at Goss Stadium for both the regionals and super regionals, and then a nice draw too on the other side of the bracket. So you don't have to worry about matching up with another elite team to sort of bust you out of the bracket. I'll say but from some of the conversations we've had here on our radio show with some of the players, they understand the pressure, they know the expectations this season, and they seem very much at peace with it and ready to go.
Yeah, it's, going back to that 17-18 season, like that run in 17 and 18 was entirely driven by the hunger of those guys being left out of the tournament in 2016. So I'm very curious to see if there's that hunger from those guys who, obviously it was a heartbreak in LSU last year. Obviously, the Beavers felt like they had a chance to win that regional, and like TJ mentioned, you just ran out of arms, and didn't quite have it.
So I have an answer for you in 2018, actually. So number 1 seed Florida did make it, but just to give you an example, like it's game 3 of a super regional and they won on 1 in 11 innings, right? I mean, we're talking about the margins are like this.
And like you said, there's
right here.
There's always like you said, a factor of luck and just with baseball that doesn't exist across the board. So that, like you said, that obviously plays into it too. I want to get Ryan's thoughts on talking to Mitch Canham and the guys yesterday. We've obviously talked to him, I think 3 times now, kind of getting ready for the start of the season. TJ mentioned obviously the news of losing a pitcher for the year in Aiden Jimenez, and that obviously is a big miss. But nevertheless, the pitching staff does have solid depth. I mean, like TJ said, major bummer, but I don't think it's like detrimental. Like it stinks, but I think they can overcome it. What's kind of the mood of the team right now, and how excited are they to go down to a Surprise? Obviously, for the matchups this weekend, they got New Mexico, Minnesota, Cal State Bakersfield, Minnesota again down in Surprise this weekend. How ready is the team?
They're very excited to get down there, and like TJ was saying, the expectations. Heinlein, he reiterated it again the other day of that's what the goal is, that's what the culture is, that's what the expectation is, that's what every guy is working towards and I know they're just excited to get out there and play some ball down in the sun. That's what Caraway said. He's like, hey, look, I'm
no doubt,
Cali boy, like. The gray right now I don't really like, but hey, on Friday we get to go play some ball with the guys. Like that's what I'm looking forward to. And really, I think the biggest thing that Canham is looking forward from this team is how do they respond to adversity in that first couple games there, and kind of using that as a way of like, hey, we can use this when things aren't going our way in the season, or propel us for our next few games this season too. And he was saying that like he's seen teams that started fast those first couple weeks of the season and they don't make it to the postseason at all. And he's seen teams that have started slow and they've made it to Omaha. So really that's like his biggest point of emphasis in terms of injuries. The Aiden injury sucks big time because he was projected to have a big role. I know Leif Palmer is also injured too, but he's expected to be back at a later point in time. His is not really long term, but so they'll get him back, and I've heard good stuff about him. He's really talented freshman, 6'6", really quality guy too, depending on when they can get him back in there. But I think the biggest question I have is just what that depth is going to be. How tested are they going to be in those game situations where that pitching is going to matter, like we saw in the Baton Rouge regional last year. And that and two of teams have gotta have it. That 22 year I definitely think was one where that was a gotta have it type of year of where they just fell just short of making it back to Omaha.
It's true. I mean, you go back to the last 2 years, obviously that Auburn series, it was right there, and Oregon State was obviously at home, and Oregon State for the most part, has won in those situations. When you get yourself the super regionals at home, Oregon State's been pretty good in that regard. And then obviously last year, being from Corvallis, I don't know if there's a tougher draw in the country than having to go to LSU. Like, maybe I think Mississippi State, like there's 3 or 4 college baseball stadiums that hold like 10,000 people, and LSU's one of them, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a tough place to go play, especially, in summertime when it's starting to get the humidity and everything. So it's way better to make those Southern teams come up to Corvallis this time of year, but definitely a lot of excitement, a lot that we're going to be able to see, and we'll obviously be podcasting a whole lot more throughout the season as we kind of get to see what the team is. I want to close the podcast on a bit of a fun note, guys, and want to throw this out there to you guys as we are right now. TJ, you're obviously very dialed into the Major League with your Marine Layer podcast, so I'm curious your thoughts on this. Decent chance Oregon State has another number 1 overall pick come this
decent chance.
This June
There's a
draft.
chance.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
What do you
there's a
think?
chance.
What's your
Top
thoughts
5
there?
for sure. The top 5 for Travis for sure. I would be floored if he doesn't go top 5.
Yeah.
Top 3 probably. The only issue is there's this kid at West Virginia, JJ Weatherholt, who is probably better, arguably better
Sure.
than Travis Fazana is. As good as Travis is, I mean, JJ Weatherholt is. He's pretty
Yeah.
unbelievable. And I've
Sure.
seen some recruiting rankings ranking him, or some draft rankings
Sure.
of him above Travis. And
Yeah.
the team's looking for a middle infielder. It's going to be him over Travis. I believe he plays a little bit more shortstop than Travis does. And if he plays shortstop, value goes up a little higher.
Sure.
Even if the bat's the same. But I mean, it's no discount to Travis Fazana. Like, there's no weakness in Travis Fazana's game, which is incredible, right? He like the contact skills, the power skills, the defense, the base running, the leadership, the makeup. I mean, he's got all of it.
Yeah.
And if he goes out and sets the bar even higher, then we could be having a different conversation once June and July rolls around and the draft does. But for now, I mean, at least how it sits, top 5, yeah. Yes.
What is, and I'm curious.
I don't even think that's a question. That's a certainty.
For both of you guys, we'll go ahead and start with Ryan here. I'm just curious, what is that, from your perspective, what does that do for the recruiting of your program to say, hey, 2019, Adley Rutschman went number 1 overall, and just a few years later, we're going to put another guy in the top 5. Like, is that just the best recruiting tool you could imagine?
Oh, absolutely. And I think too, Hainline was saying that when they won the title in 2018, that like you notice those type of things, and that's something that plays in decision for guys that might not have been recruited by Oregon State out of high school for them to come here. And that's definitely a great pitch that a lot of high schoolers can look at and be like, hey, look, these guys here, Adley Rutschman, Michael Conforto, even
all the above,
Travis Fazana, like these guys have played here at Oregon State. They've developed really well and they're playing at the next level, and I want to play at the next level, and I want to come here to be able to do that.
Right. And I think that itself is going to be my barometer for how good this team is, because again, you go back to that 2018 team. I know I'm going to miss somebody, but you had, obviously Nick Madrigal go really high in that draft. You had Trevor Larnett go really high in that draft. You had Caden Grenier go really high in that draft. I know I'm forgetting somebody off the top of my head. Stephen Kwan went in that draft. I think Michael Gretler went in that draft. Like, basically that, like, you look at it, you're like, oh yeah, no wonder they won the title. There were 6 or 7 first round or whatever it was, guys in the high
pros.
High picks. So I'm curious to see who else. And like TJ was saying, does the entire lineup boast that kind of 2018 ability? Now with 2018, I will say this: Oregon State had dominant pitching. Obviously had pitching. 2018 we think of the offense and whatnot, but up until Omaha, where things kind of shifted, they needed a bit more offense. The arms were getting tired. Pitching is what won them a lot of games that year. So I think that's going to be an absolutely key thing to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead, TJ.
And you just go back to luck. Why did they win the title? Drop the
foul
ball.
I like to think
that is luck.
I like
don't
to
know
think
if you could talk around that one.
I like to think that those Arkansas guys maybe just missed that day of like baseball training camp and didn't really know how to handle a fly ball. And
it's
hey,
possible.
those them Razorbacks are going to be thinking about that one for a long time. I'm sure if we were going to talk to an Arkansas fan, they'd be like, "Yeah, remember that 2018 World Series? Yeah, good times." But nevertheless, that'll go ahead and wrap up this edition of the podcast. Big thanks to Dylan Callaghan-Croley for joining on the early segment, and then obviously TJ Mathewson and Ryan Harlan for joining me on this segment. Guys, enjoy the games this weekend. We'll obviously come back here in a short amount of time and talk more hoops, more baseball. I know it's going to be an exciting spring session as well. So big thanks to you guys, and looking forward to talking again soon.
Spring
Sounds
football
good.
also too on the horizon as well. So that's going to be another thing to look forward to from what we've
Absolutely.
already talked about. Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, big thanks to everyone for tuning into this edition of the Edge podcast. Stay locked to BeaversEdge.com for all the latest from the entire staff. And thanks again for watching this episode.